The Ni no Kuni series is an interesting beast for me. Like with another newer JRPG series I could mention, it all stems from a game that quickly and rightfully cemented itself in gaming history, but the subsequent sequels and spin-offs struggle to feel like worthwhile entries in comparison. The movie is meh, the mobile game is a blockchaining microtransaction nightmare, and Ni no Kuni 2 is a whole disappointed rant by me for another time. But even if the series never finds a way to be anything good past this point, at least the original still holds up. Developed by Level 5, Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch is heavily inspired by Studio Ghibli, with the acclaimed studio even doing the animated cutscenes. So, the word inspired doesn't really do the situation justice. It's essentially a Ghibli film, it's just a full-blown JRPG instead. What's did I hear from the back? This isn't the original Ni no Kuni game? I guess the jig's up. Yes, we're looking at the Switch port of the PS3 remake of the original region-exclusive DS game. So technically, it's not the original. However, the remake follows it completely, even with different gameplay and graphical overhauls. Or so I'm told. I do intend to check it out at some point, and I have acquired it. But since this version is infinitely more accessible in both senses of the word, I thought it might be more useful to cover this version for now. It was originally released in 2011 on the PS3, but has more recently been ported to pretty much every current-ish gen console there is. Level 5 is quite the stickler with their region locking though, so you can't just swap out your region and switch the languages on the fly. You'll need to purchase an actual Japanese version to play it this way. Plot-wise, you follow the tale of a boy named Oliver, whose mother passes away after saving his life. Oliver then learns of the existence of a parallel world that is connected to his own through its inhabitants, each person having an equivalent soulmate whose lives are linked. Along with Shizuku, a toy made by his mother that's come to life, Oliver travels to this second country in the hopes that he can find his mother's soulmate and potentially bring her back to life. It's a pretty cool setting, and the mechanics of the world are utilised really well, with Oliver needing to travel between the two worlds throughout the game. Oliver's world being a more Layton-esque modern town, and the second country being a fantasy world with magic and monsters. And it's pretty fun seeing the comparisons between each linked character, such as a cat in Motorville having their soulmate be a king in Ding Dong Dell. I think it's explored pretty well, especially in the main themes of the plot, which can get pretty somber at times. That being said, ever seen a Ghibli film and felt it was well made, but kinda falls flat if you ignore the atmosphere and overall charm? Then you'll probably feel a similar way about Ni no Kuni. That's not to say I don't think it's a great game, I think it's quite masterful at what it's meant to be. It's a game that encompasses childlike wonder and adventure in an experience like no other. But if you're looking for anything deeper, you might come away a little disappointed, though with respect to the artistry of the whole thing. It's made for kids and adults alike, so you can know not to expect certain things from the plot. The battle system is a strange and unique one, with both creature capturing mechanics and real-time action. You can play as your party members themselves, as well as their respective imagin, or familiars in English. The real-time action aspect is something that's really cool in concept, but feels like it falls a little short in these fights. A lot of the strategy comes from timing your various moves to the situation at hand, with each command lasting a certain time and having a cooldown after use. For instance, if a monster starts building up a special attack, it's best to stop what you're doing and guard to avoid some serious damage. Often though, the timing between the cue an attack is coming and its execution is so small that I feel you can't really react in time. Though I've never really been a fan of turn-based real-time combat systems like the ATB Gorge from Final Fantasy, so I can understand that I might just not be the best fit for what's on offer here. There's a whole bunch of familiars to befriend, train, and fight with. It's largely not as complex as many other monster rearing games, but it's still something that adds some flair to the experience. You can feed them treats to boost certain stats and evolve them after they reach certain levels, but I found most of the strategy comes from just picking who clicked with me best and grinding. Your other party members will use their familiars as they see fit, and they're pretty unpredictable, so you'll find yourself swapping over to them constantly if you're wanting a certain attack or buff. And they can frequently just die on you if they're not focusing on self-preservation, so that can be pretty frustrating. But hey, it's not necessarily a hard battle system, it just feels like the strategy can get a little lost in all the chaos. When you're not battling it out though, you're walking around absolutely gorgeous towns and natural landmarks. There's side quests and hidden chests everywhere to promote exploration, and the whole place feels really alive. Even if most areas end up amounting to a straight linear path with dead ends branching off. It's just a testament to the world that's been built and how enjoyable it is to just wander around the place and take it all in. And the exceptional sweeping orchestrated OST is absolutely a key factor to wrapping it all up in a lovely package. It's absolutely no small task playing a full-on JRPG in another language. They are long hauls, usually with complex systems and plotlines that give it a very epic scope. And as I talked about previously, the balance of keeping motivated is a hard thing to keep up effectively. And for these purposes, Ni no Kuni is actually a really good choice if you're interested in giving the genre a crack. Due to its intended audience being so broad, it's very grounded in what concepts it presents, with only mild fantasy words seeping into your normal everyday vocab. Most of the words you'll be seeing will absolutely be useful in other games and in your everyday experience, which is always a big plus. And since the game as a whole is very chill for the genre, it feels like a good place to practice without the high stakes of misunderstanding that the more intense JRPGs can have with its more complex natures. As the game is a blending of film elements with a game, there is thankfully a good amount of voice work throughout. The characters are incredibly varied, so you'll get a wonderful range of voices to work with too. Shizuku, for example, speaks pretty fast, and with a different dialect to many of the other characters, so he'll be more challenging to follow along with. On the other hand, characters like Oliver and Maru are much easier to keep up with, so you can work with your level nice and easily. There's also subtitles over all the cutscenes, which is really helpful to read along with in case you do struggle with your listening. Now, Ni no Kuni has always been particularly notable for two big reasons. One is the obvious fact that it is literally a Ghibli film as a game, and the other one is this book. Far from a strategy guide or novelization of the game's story, this is an integral part of the gameplay. This physical copy comes with the DS version of the game, and you'd have a rough time trying to play it without it. But for the remake, a digital edition is accessible from the menu instead. Amongst other things, it contains answers to puzzles, spells, and even an encyclopedia of items and monsters, and throughout the whole game you'll need to refer to its pages for information. It's a really neat idea, though it could be argued it's not as effective without the real deal. They are identical as far as I can tell though, so if for whatever reason you have access to the book, you can still totally use it for the remake. And if you really feel like delving into some supplementary material, there's folk tales and other such oddities in the book too, that you can enjoy that helps to build up the world as a whole. Truly, it's a really unique concept, and I think it's just asking for use as language practice. Even ignoring the Wizard's Companion, the game by its very nature has great opportunities for language practice. The way the characters are written and the way side quests are presented lends itself to a lot of repetition all through exposition, so you can be sure that any vocabulary you study will be tested thoroughly. There's also a lot of pun-based humour scattered throughout, such as the monster names and locations. It's well worth trying to figure them out, context and everything, and if you're feeling creative, have a crack at figuring out how you'd localize it yourself. Localization exercises like this are great for engaging with what you're reading, and thinking over it, this game has opportunities like that in spades, so something to keep an eye out for as you play. Being a large-scale RPG, it's a heavy undertaking playing this in another language. The vocabulary is also on the very wide spectrum, including fantasy vernacular, though it's not too heavy on the game-specific stuff. So if you do have your skills up to an N3 level to get started, with some hearty effort you'll be able to get through and feel good about it while you do. It's a game that very much intends to accommodate a children's audience, so it's not too hard to read or anything. It's just that the scope is large enough that the more stuff you don't have to look up will be of great benefit to motivation. It goes without saying, but don't know any Japanese? Play the English release. I think I could say this in the case of many long-form games, but getting to the end of this in Japanese for practice would be a great achievement. It's not particularly complex, but that's one of its strengths in this regard, and it's so full that you'd be hard-pressed to not grow in your skills by committing to it. And there's a lot of voice acting, which is a big plus for practicing listening, and some characters will present a nice challenge keeping up with their pace. You'll encounter a lot of great vocabulary and kanji that will be repeated often for revision, and the in-game book is a wonderful comprehension tool that you can go above and beyond with if you enjoy the world building. Truly, if it's on your radar for practice and you've thus far avoided the English release, you would not be making a poor choice. It's a great game, even if the journey is a little more exciting than the destination ends up being. Its Ghibli charm is undeniable, and it more than covers up for where the game would otherwise be a little more on the mediocre side. As a truly unique JRPG, it's definitely worth giving a look in. If you're not enamored by the charm though, it might not necessarily be your cup of tea. The story or gameplay rely on you liking that charm for it to be its most effective, so it'll lose most of its appeal and be more of a quirky game than a stunning one. But don't knock it till you try it, it's a classic for good reason, and it's super easy to get your hands on these days. And that ends the backlog of games that I had holed up for reviews, which is great because now I've got a bit more of a clean slate in what I'm going to be able to review in the future. Hopefully in the realm of region exclusives, which I've unintentionally been neglecting. So look forward to that. Anyway, until next time, ja mata!